In section 49 of Counsels and Maxims, Schopenhauer discusses time and change and how we should react to the knowledge that everything in this world is transitory. He concludes with some advice about not becoming time's debtor. He begins, that time works great changes, and that all things are in their nature fleeting, these are truths that should never be forgotten. Hence, in whatever case you may be, it is well to picture yourself the opposite. In prosperity, be mindful of misfortune. In friendship, of enmity. In good weather, of days when the sky is overcast. In love, of hatred. In moments of trust, to imagine the betrayal that will make you regret your confidence. And so too when you are in evil plight, to have a lively sense of happier times. What a lasting source of true worldly wisdom were there. We should then always reflect and not be so very easily deceived, because in general you should anticipate the very changes that the years will bring. It sounds almost like a kind of Schopenhauerian version of the prayer of St. Francis, where there's hatred, let me sow love. Schopenhauer says, when you experience love, think of hatred. When you are trusting someone, think of betrayal. Because in this world, all things necessarily will change. You should be prepared for the change that will inevitably happen. And consider the opposite of whatever you are experiencing, whether it be good or evil. This, he says, is part of the essence of worldly wisdom. So he goes on. Perhaps in no form of knowledge is personal experience so indispensable as in learning to see that all things are unstable and transitory in this world. There is nothing that in its own place and for the time it lasts is not a product of necessity, and therefore capable of being fully justified. And it is this fact that makes the circumstances of every year, every month, even of every day, seem as though they might maintain their right to last to all eternity. But we know that this can never be the case, and that in a world where all is fleeting, change alone endures. He is a prudent man who is not only undeceived by apparent stability, but is able to forecast the lines upon which movement will take place. So, another paragraph, the only stable thing in this world is change. Although there is necessity, it is the necessity of things which deludes us into thinking that they will be unchangeable, and this is an error. There's a footnote at the end of this paragraph, and here's the footnote. Chance plays so great a part in all human affairs that when a man tries to ward off a remote danger by present sacrifice, the danger often vanishes under some new and unforeseen development of events. And then the sacrifice, in addition to being a complete loss, brings about such an altered state of things as to be in itself a source of positive danger in the face of this new development. In taking measures of precaution, then, it is well not to look too far ahead, but to reckon with chance, and often to oppose a courageous front to a danger in the hope that, like many a dark thundercloud, it may pass away without breaking. That's the end of the footnote. A footnote about chance. Interesting as well. We expect change, but we also expect that the dangers that we see coming may not come. And so it is a good advice in taking precautions not to plan too far ahead, shades of something that we said before about having a plan in the game of chess, but leaving room for a certain amount of luck in response to circumstances. If you plan too far ahead, you'll find yourself creating new hazards and traps for yourself. And then also simply putting up a brave front and hoping that the danger you foresee may pass like a dark cloud overhead without breaking, without raining on you. So back to the main text now. But people generally think that present circumstances will last, and that matters will go in the future as they have done in the past. Their mistake arises from the fact that they do not understand the causes of the things they see, causes which, unlike the effects they produce, contain in themselves the germ of future change. The effects are all that people know, and they hold fast to them on the supposition that those unknown causes, which were sufficient to bring them about, will also be able to maintain them as they are. This is a very common error, and the fact that it is common is not without its advantage, for it means that people always err in unison, and hence the calamity which results from the error affects all alike, and is therefore easy to bear. Whereas, if a philosopher makes a mistake, he is alone in his error, and so at a double disadvantage. Two things in this paragraph I think noteworthy. First, that last one, it seems there's a further burden that the philosopher or the wise man must bear, which is that his mistakes are mistakes in which he enjoys little or no company. When he makes a mistake, it is his fault, but also he has no fellows who are in the same boat to sympathize with him or to endure the results of the mistake with him. It's quite the opposite with common errors. The more common they are, the more that the sort of collective society is entirely invested in them and is able at least to bear up the consequences together. So the sort of ship of fools sails on, enduring all of their errors in unison and together, whereas I suppose if I'm pushing the metaphor, I might say that the wise man is in a rowboat by himself, enduring the hazards that come his way solo. But this is the burden that they must bear. The other point I thought from this paragraph, this idea that the mistake people make is to suppose that is to stick with the effects. They see the effects, but they don't see the causes. Now, the causes have this necessity to them, according to Schopenhauer, and the causes have in them also the germ of future effects. To understand the causes is really to see how things are going to go. But people who see the surface only, who don't get behind appearances to the reality of things, people who go only from effects, assume that whatever caused this effect to be the way it is now is capable of causing this effect to be that way forever. And so they make forever plans. They plan on things being just the same as they are, continuing as they are. This is a common error, but it is an error. So it's connected with this superficiality of the ordinary understanding of the world, I think Schopenhauer is saying. There's a footnote attached to the end of this paragraph again, a shorter one, and here it is. I may remark parenthetically that all this is a confirmation of the principle laid down in Welthauswille und Vorstellung, that error always consists in making a wrong inference, that is, in ascribing a given effect to something that does not cause it. Okay. The reference there is to Book 1, page 94 of The World as Will and Representation. That might be an interesting detail to chase down later on. I'm going to go back to the main text now. Schopenhauer continues. But in saying that we should anticipate the effects of time, I mean that we should mentally forecast what they are likely to be. I do not mean that we should practically forestall them by demanding the immediate performance of promises which time alone can fulfill. The man who makes this demand will find out that there is no worse or more exacting usurer than time, and that if you compel time to give money in advance, you will have to pay a rate of interest more ruinous than any Jew would require. It is possible, for instance, to make a tree burst forth into leaf, blossom, or even bear fruit within a few days by the application of unslaked lime and artificial heat, but after that the tree will wither away. So a young man may abuse his strength, it may be only for a few weeks, by trying to do at 19 what he could easily manage at 30, and time may give him the loan for which he asks, but the interest he will have to pay comes out of the strength of his later years. Nay, it is part of his very life itself. This image I like very much of time as a usurer. You can borrow from it by demanding advance payment, demanding the ability to do now at age 19 what you might be able to do with more skill and training and strength at age 30. You might get away with that, but the ultimate price you're paying is coming out of the later part of your life, which will be more full of suffering and pain as a result of your sort of spendthrift ways in your youth. It's possible to abuse your body, your mind, your overall life. I think this is part of what Schopenhauer means by going into time's debt. Time is a usurer and a very vicious one. So you don't want to borrow in large quantities from time. Time here is spelled each time with a capital T. Going on. There are some kinds of illness in which restoration to health is possible only by letting the complaint run its natural course, after which it disappears without leaving any trace of its existence. But if the sufferer is very impatient, and while he is still affected, insists that he is completely well, in this case, too, time will grant the loan, and the complaint may be shaken off. But lifelong weakness and chronic mischief will be the interest paid upon it. Another good example of going into debt to time, to not to invest the time to await a full recovery from an illness, but to get up and resume arduous work while you're still only, we might say, 70 or 80% recovered. You can get away with that. Time will pay you, but it will extract interest, Schopenhauer says. And this may be something that's more familiar to us than his example about the forcing a tree to bloom in a short time. That, yeah, if you do return to work, you overdo it, you end up paying it back. And this is a debt that you pay to time. Why? Because you were impatient, because you demanded now what you could have had if you'd been more patient and willing to give time its way. Next paragraph. Again, in time of war or general disturbance, a man may require ready money at once, and have to sell out his investments in land or consols for a third or even a still smaller fraction of the sum he would have received for them if he could have waited for the market to right itself, which would have happened in due course. But he compels time to grant him a loan, and his loss is the interest he has to pay. Or perhaps he wants to go on a long journey and requires money. In 1 or 2 years he could lay a sufficient sum out of his income, but he cannot afford to wait. And so he either borrows it or deducts it from his capital. In other words, he gets time to lend him the money in advance. The interest he pays is a disordered state of his accounts, and permanent and increasing deficits, which he can never make good. Such is time's usury, and all who cannot wait are its victims. There is no more thriftless proceeding than to try and mend the measured pace of time. Be careful, then, not to become its debtor. This is, in a way, a development of earlier advice about patience. You must be patient. You do not want the third example here. I think was a great one, right? If you need money right now, why I have to have the money for a journey or for something else. If you have to sell in a down market, you are the loser. Whereas if you could wait for the market to right itself, for the properties to return to their historic value, then you would have the same thing at the cost of having waited a while longer. So there's something going on here, sort of early version perhaps of time value, Schopenhauer's version of time value of money, that if you demand now what you could have in the future at lower cost, you are, in a sense, paying interest to that usurer time. And Schopenhauer's advice, his kind of worldly wisdom, is don't do that. That's not worth it. Not a good practice. So that is section 49 of Schopenhauer's Counsels and Maxims. We'll take a look at section 50 in the next video. Thanks for watching today. Goodbye.